The Broken Blueprint, Part 1. The Beginnings of Our Educational Work, 1867 to 1904. Beginnings at Battle Creek. The foundations of our educational work were laid amid successes and failures. But learning the stories of what happened back then provides us with extremely important lessons, so we today can avoid the mistakes and learn from the successes. The first little schools. The educational work of our denomination began with home schools, in which one or several families would have someone teach their children in a home. To our knowledge, the first church school began in 1853 at Bucksbridge, New York, and was taught by Martha Byington, later Mrs. George Amadon. Back in those days, if any young man approached James White seeking ministerial training, James told him to read some books and start preaching. The first appeal for Seventh-day Adventist schools, of which there is a record, is found in a review editorial written by James White. What can be done for our children? There is no use in concealing the fact that but a small portion of the children of Sabbath keepers are forming characters for eternal life in the kingdom of God. Lessons in Denominational History, page 176, quoting Review, August 20, 1857. One day in 1867, young Edson White, 18 at the time, looked out a window of the Review building in Battle Creek and saw a man chopping wood and tossing it on a woodpile. The thought came to go out and meet him. Edson found him to be a poor man trying to recover his health at the sanitarium. That man was Goodloe Bell, 1832 to 1899. He told Edson of his eager desire to start a school. Young Edson asked him if, in his spare time, he would teach him and some other young men grammar. That humble beginning was the start of Bell's educational career in the denomination. With Edson's encouragement, a year later, Bell opened a select school in Battle Creek. Edson and William White, Ellen's sons, were among his first students. Another teenager, young John Harvey Kellogg, also attended. The school was held upstairs in a rickety building. Although the students wondered if they would fall through the floor, that never seemed to happen. Goodloe Bell was a kindly but strict teacher. In later years, all his students recognized he had been a good friend and excellent instructor. 5 years later, in 1872, the situation changed. That spring, the Whites met with the church to consider starting a denominational church school in Battle Creek. It was decided to adopt Bell's school. When it opened that fall, there were so many students that Bell had to teach a morning class for some and an evening class for those who worked days at the Review. A new school at Battle Creek. In March 1873, the General Conference session, encouraged by James and Ellen White, voted to form an educational society. $54,000 in cash or pledges was raised by the end of the year. Ellen White wept when they rejected her advice to purchase a 40-acre former fairgrounds outside Battle Creek for the school, and instead they purchased a 12-acre estate in the city near the West Health Reform Institute. In 1874, a 3-story building was erected. They had decided to make it a city school. During construction, part of the acreage was sold to help pay expenses, reducing it to 7 acres. The Foster Farm near Guag Lake, 5 miles from town, was there the whites' first choice, with a 40-acre tract, the old fairgrounds coming second. Either of these locations would have offered ample acreage for vocational training. However, in December 1873, while the whites were in the West, the church leaders purchased the Horatius Hussey estate of 12 acres on Washington Avenue in Battle Creek, directly opposite the sanitarium. It is reported that when Mrs. White heard of the action, she wept bitterly. Merlin Neff, For God and the CME, page 59. Years later, P.T. Megan wrote to a church leader who was a faithful supporter of our educational blueprint. If our people had wholeheartedly set themselves at the time to carry out God's simple plan of education, we might now be in a very different position than we are today. But our leaders, to a very great extent, urged the selling of land attached to the schools and doing away with a large amount of our physical work. This has been true at Walla Walla, Union College, and Washington Missionary College at Tacoma Park. It has also been true in other places in a smaller degree. You have felt pained and saddened at all of this, and my personal belief is that you have honestly done your best to stem the tide. But as I see it, you have not been able to put your ideas across with our educators generally any more than E. A. Sutherland and I in earlier days. Percy T. Megan, Letter to Warren Howell, January 13, 1926. Goodloe Bell was solid for spirit of prophecy principles and a strong advocate of vocational training, which he also highly recommended. Not once did he ever deviate from them. Not only were the students to learn book knowledge, but also how to work at various skills and trades. However, it bothered some people that Goodloe Bell tended to be strict, and worse, that he had no degrees. Bell had studied in Oberlin College, headed by the revivalist Charles Finney, was well educated, and firmly believed that vocational work should be included in the curriculum. But Bell had not graduated from any school. Since there has been controversy about Bell's work at Battle Creek, it should be mentioned that an outstanding biography of Goodloe Harper Bell and his teaching methods can be found in Appendix A, pages 267 to 275 of Vanderveer's book, The Wisdom Seekers. When G.R. Avery left Battle Creek after spending parts of 3 years in the college, he felt convinced that in Bell he had met a noble man, an adult a young fellow could enjoy as a lasting friend. One of Avery's contemporaries, Drury Webster Reeves, reflects in a memoir on Bell and his stern bent. Professor Bell was the most complete, all-round teacher of order and general decorum I have ever met. Reeves suggests that he acted thus because severe discipline was necessary if reforms were to be achieved, for some were so calloused in their ways that a mere hint or suggestion was not sufficient to work any change in them. Reeves probably gets closer to the explanation, however, when he describes the rough, tough student groups a teacher had to battle in raw Michigan at the time. E.K. Vanderveer, The Wisdom Seekers, page 270. The battle for classical education. So, in 1875, Sidney Brownsberger, fresh from the University of Michigan, was elected president. Goodloe Bell was placed in charge of the English department, and Uriah Smith became the Bible teacher. But Brownsberger believed in a classical, liberal arts curriculum. He demanded that only that be taught. For example, In 1877 to 1878, some of the students were taking the classical courses: Latin, Greek, mathematics, natural science, rhetoric, elocution, and geology. There was an almost complete lack of Bible courses. Only a few were required to attend Uriah Smith's Bible lectures. Brownsberger taught a curriculum little different from that of other educational institutions. This was largely because Brownsberger, according to his own testimony, knew nothing about operating a program that included industries and farming. Emmett K. Van der Veer, Adventism in America, Garyland edition, page 70. All the while, Bell, along with Ellen White, continued to urge her plan of education, but Brownsberger would have nothing to do with it. Finally, in 1881, Brownsberger resigned. It is of interest that, years later, Brownsberger accepted the blueprint. In 1909, he went to the South and helped establish the Asheville Agricultural School near Fletcher, North Carolina. It was a difficult problem for the new school to adjust itself to the plan of education outlined by Mrs. White in 1872. The education of the day was classical, the main emphasis being placed on a knowledge of the classics, mathematics, ancient languages, philosophy, and certain sciences. Her message called for an education that would include practical training and character training. Just how to accomplish this baffled many of the early educators of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Lessons in Denominational History, page 181. Needing someone to head the school, the board still felt they could not put Bell in charge since he lacked that college degree. It would just not look good. So they found Alexander McLearn, someone else who had a classical degree. In 1881, the year of James White's death, he was voted in as president of the school. Immediately, Goodloe Bell began agitating vocational training as outlined in the Spirit of Prophecy. McLearn would hear nothing of it, and soon the entire college was divided over the issue. Uriah Smith, still the Bible teacher, sided with McLearn. Others sided with Bell. Ellen White wrote a lengthy letter which she had read to the Battle Creek Church. You will find it in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, pages 45 to 84. I am pained to find you, my much esteemed brother, involved in this matter, on the wrong side, with those whom I know God is not leading. Ellen G. White to Uriah Smith, March 28, 1882, Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 45. The controversy grew so severe that the college was closed for a year. McLearn, firm in his belief in the classics, not only left the college, but the church as well. The two methods contrasted. The following statement by Bell clarifies his understanding of the Spirit of Prophecy blueprint. The popular method of filling the student's mind with that which is not practical and hurrying him through a certain course in order that he may obtain a diploma is not true education. True education begins on the inside, at the core, with that which is practical. It builds up and strengthens a symmetry of character that by and by, in this life, will show itself in some grand, good, and noble work for the world. The school at South Lancaster seeks to attain to this ideal. G. H. Bell, Review, December 26, 1882. George I. Butler, President of the General Conference and Chairman of the Battle Creek College Board during the height of that crisis, summed it up this way. We can never have true success until the main object for which the college was created is kept constantly in view, and the spirit of true humility and the love of Christ actuates teachers and scholars. The spirit of pride and display and vanity and worldly success has been far too prominent to make a show in graduating exercises and in displaying diplomas, and to be called professor has with many been a great object. We firmly believe if this institution had ever been called a college, but had simply been a school of instruction where our young people could come to learn things that would make them useful, and where they could learn God's truth for this time without any graduating exercises, diplomas, etc., that it would have accomplished far more good than it has, and it would have escaped some disasters it has experienced. The schools of our land are mostly conducted in a manner to generate pride and vanity. More attention has been paid at times to fitting pupils for teachers in the public schools of the country than to prepare them for a place in the work of God. As a consequence, we have sent out many of our brightest young people to follow the business of teaching public school. But it would have been far better for this cause and for them had many of these devoted themselves to the work of God. G.I. Butler, Review, September 31, 1883.